to thee, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Would anyone else like to come up here and talk about angry Jesus? Come on there. It's a cinch. No, it's not. You know that Lent is not far off when we start getting words like this for our scripture lesson on Sunday. And I hope you all know that Jesus was fond of an ancient practice called hyperbole, that he doesn't literally want us to gouge out our eyes or cut off our hands. I get asked about that a lot. Actually not, I don't get asked about that at all. But in case you were wondering, that's not what he means. What he's talking about is getting to the root of what causes you to break a commandment. So, have any of you had to memorize the 10 Commandments as a kid? How many of you? Yes. So we knew that when we did something wrong, we could say to our mom, well, I didn't break any commandment. Guilty? So the commandments kind of became the abiding rule of what you absolutely couldn't do, and as long as you weren't doing that, you were good, right? So that attitude is what Jesus is warning his followers. If you want to be a follower of me, we're going to be a community, and the community has to be accountable to each other. And to be accountable to each other, we have to work for a higher purpose and not give in to our base desires and our base angers and, all the stuff that's base, all that stuff. So when I was in the Order of St. Helena, which was a convent for Episcopalians, I was with a bunch of other women. I was there for almost 10 years, took vows, worked my Al-Anon program. I'd been in Al-Anon before I joined the sisters, but once I got into the convent, it didn't take me long to realize that I had a problem with alcohol and to eventually go into an AA meeting and eventually get a sponsor and eventually start working the steps. So when you work the steps, this comes in the 4th step of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So you have the first 3 steps to get your head on straight, to realize that there is a God and you're not God, I am not God, and that only through intercession with God would I have the power to change my life. And the 12 steps help you to change your life. They happen to be very spiritual steps, and they happen to happen through an Episcopal minister in the 20s and 30s in New York City, which is where AA started. So these steps were a good thing for me to do, living in a convent. But the hard thing about doing step 4 is that you have to write down in columns all the different categories of things that you're guilty of. And they get to the root of the problem. So murder is not one of them. Infidelity, that's not one of them. But what is part of these is looking at your resentments. Has anybody ever had a resentment? So resentments are as common as a cold, and we all get them, but most of us don't really know that we have a resentment. We can do this thing called nursing a resentment. We can get focused like obsessively on a resentment. Anybody ever suffer that? We can act inappropriately because of the resentment is making us a little wonky. We're off balance. So in the 12 steps, you have to write down, according to these questions that you have to answer, all the resentments that you have, all of them. And then you have to read the list to another person who is your sponsor, and who, luckily, I had a very good sponsor when I first got into AA, whose sponsor had been sponsored by Bob, one of the originators that Bill and Bob started at Alcoholics Anonymous. But Dr. Bob was the trainer of the person who trained the person who trained the person who was my sponsor. So I learned how to be honest according to Bob's wisdom, and it was a good thing because I have a lot of resentments hanging in there. Me, in a convent. So the anger could be sliced with a knife when you walked into the place where the sisters live, which is called the enclosure. There was alcohol flowing freely, boxes of wine in the refrigerator, and the hard stuff for the ladies who had grown up with alcohol in their homes. And when Vatican II came along, if you're Roman Catholic, you know about Vatican II. Most of us Episcopalians know about it too because it spilled right on over. A lot of things were thrown out thrown out from church, so it was okay now for sisters to smoke cigarettes and to have a little drinky poo in the evening before we went to see the guests and have our shared meal where we got holy again. If I sound like I'm making fun of them, I was one of them, so I can say it. But it was a very toxic place for this person who didn't know she was an alcoholic to live, because I was in denial and they were irritating my denial. So I had to go get right with God, practice these steps in order to get through discernment for the priesthood. This was the star that was guiding me through. I wanted to be a priest, and it became apparent God wanted me sober to be a priest. And I had to get to the root of all my anger, all my resentments. And wouldn't you know, you don't commit adultery. You don't say things you don't mean. You don't get ugly with people if you're doing this work of looking at your resentments. My sponsor was very frank. She said, if you have a resentment, you will drink again. Just as simple as that. Now, having a Sunday school teacher teach me you shouldn't be angry. Now, don't be angry. Well, that was ridiculous. We all get angry, but that's what I learned in Sunday school, so I didn't give it any attention. But if somebody tells me, an adult, you will drink again, I understand that. I don't want to drink again. So I better do my spiritual work, right? So I did, and I do, and I have been humbled by it all, because once you start doing the work, there's another layer and another layer, and you go deeper, and there's never any end to the work. And that's what Jesus is getting about in these stories. He's not trying to scare us or to say, well, what kind of a church is this? Nobody's going to come if we have to do this kind of work. I don't want to do this kind of work. And his disciples said the same thing. Notice my arms crossing like this? That shows I have a resentment. Can I get a resentment about people not listening? Yeah, but that's because I forget it's never about me. It's always about God. And it's always between you and your God. It's never about you and me. But this community that we have, even if we're just together on Sundays, this is our community. We are accountable to each other. And Jesus put this one little story in the middle of all these commandments. And that's the story of bringing your gifts to the altar and then receiving communion. If you have a resentment, are we supposed to do that? No, here it is. This is the most important part of this reading, kind of buried in there. If you have a resentment, before you even bring up the gifts, which is our offering of money, pledges, our offering of the wine and the bread, it comes up, those are called the gifts, offering of the gifts. And the biggest gift of all is us. When we walk up and present our hungry selves to Jesus, get on our knees and receive the living Christ inside of us, we're supposed to not even be there if we have a resentment. We're supposed to leave our gift at the altar, walk over to whoever we have a resentment with, and say, what? Told the kids, apologize. Say, I'm so sorry. I've held a resentment against you because you're just so awful and I can't stand it. And you can't do that. You wouldn't believe how many apologies make an excuse for the person who is apologizing. It is the hardest thing in the world to do a good apology, to really mean it. When your mother made you apologize to your sister, did you really mean it? Never. Never. So we teach these things to our kids. You have to be completely open and vulnerable, and you have to be read like a book, so that when you say you're sorry, you mean it with every single fiber. That's the eye you have to cut out. Is this little tight knot in our hearts that wants to do it our way because we feel safer, and to hell with the rest of you. So that's the rock that we have to take out, and take your anger out on it, not on other people. And know that you're not in this alone, because if we become honest and make reconciliation with one another, that reconciliation becomes the mortar which builds our house of the holy. Reconciliation is the heart of love. So the lesson is actually about reconciliation, not about angry Jesus. You can believe me or not.